There was a time when slow was working because there was a time when democracy around the world was growing. And democracy means people have to develop opinions, they have to place votes, they have a say in who gets elected. In fact, the organization that would help the most was USAID. And we have instead gutted and shut it down.
Damn it. I knew we needed them. I didn't know we needed them.
That's the point, right? We could be creating hospitals. We could be doing humanitarian support. We could be evacuating children to safe harbors so that they can have education, so they don't have to grow up in that trauma. But
I hear you. Let's go back to the initial point at the beginning of this podcast, and we went on an awesome, very long weave right there, but let's weave our way back here. So you had said USAID was good, and you were like prior to Trump won, right? So let's start there. What happened that made it not as good?
It's not as good. It's less effective. It's less effective. In a world that's controlled by authoritarian powers, soft power doesn't really play well, right? It's the difference between like when you're flavoring a soup with salt versus flavoring a soup with paprika, right? Soft power is paprika. It might make the deviled egg look pretty, but the deviled egg still just tastes like deviled egg. You don't even taste the paprika. But you add a little bit more salt, you make a lot more flavor. Authoritarian rulers can add salt to whatever they want to add. They can
smash heads.
They can smash heads. They can make people disappear. They can close business deals. They can single-handedly write executive orders, right? That completely change policy. Soft power doesn't get to do that. Soft power takes time. It's hearts and minds. It's slow. There was a time when slow was working because there was a time when democracy around the world was growing. And democracy means people have to develop opinions, they have to place votes, they have a say in who gets elected, right? That's not the world that we live in anymore. Netanyahu's been in power since almost 2012.
I mean, technically way longer before that too.
And there have actually been elections in Israel, right?
Yeah, they have so many parties.
Yeah, there's only been one person other than Netanyahu who was in power during that window of time, and even then, that guy was replaced by Netanyahu.
Naftali Bennett,
right? And you've got Bashar al-Assad in Syria that's been doing the thing. You've got Erdogan that's been doing the thing. You've got Xi Jinping that's been doing the thing. You've got Vladimir Putin that's been doing the thing. Like
Xi,
countries have been growing authoritarian, and we're seeing a shift in all the other third world and developing countries, all through Latin America. You're even seeing it in European politics. You're definitely seeing it in Southeast Asian politics, where strong man leaders are taking over and democratic leaders are backing away or losing elections, right? And that's the shift that we're seeing. That shift really started circa 2014, 2015. When we saw Erdogan in Turkey.
Turkey coup?
The Turkey coup in 2016.
Yeah.
That was a gigantic red flag. I will never forget the day that my wife and I saw that on television. We looked at each other and we were like, holy shit.
What a name, too. Turkey coup. That was awesome.
Turkey just had a coup that failed, and then there was all this extrajudicial punishment. And that was the most secular, most reliable government, the only really state in the Middle East that has a separation of church and state. And they just went fucking crazy overnight.
And what happened a year after that?
You're going to have to tell me on this one.
The Ritz-Carlton prison in Saudi Arabia. Crazy.
So you're seeing testing. Like this is a great example for anybody who's in the IT world, right? Boundary testing. At what point does the system fail? How far can you push it before the system fails? And that's what we're seeing, people taking steps all over the place. When does the system fail?
All right, so you talk a lot on every podcast we've ever done, and on every podcast you do almost. You talk a lot about China, and at the brass tacks of it, the big reason is because they're the number 2 GDP in the world, right? And they're just behind us. It was, last I checked, it was like 20 to 18 or something like that in trillions. China, as you pointed out earlier, again in this conversation, has something like called the Belt and Road Initiative, and China 2025, and I think China 2050, whatever the fuck all of them are, where they are using soft power around the world. They're buying ports in Greece, they're buying up fucking infrastructure all over Africa, and basically raising debt that these countries, or in South America, they know they can never repay, and just in return they'll be like, all right, we'll forgive the debt, but you're going to let us do X, Y, and Z, right? And they've been really, really effective about it. And this is why, like, I live in the real world, and I understand something like soft power, meaning something at the core of what USAID is supposed to be, is critical. It really is. What happened, though, to where our soft power suddenly was about, like, spending fucking, $1 million to move trans initiatives in fucking Colombia? Like you and I both know that's a waste.
Right.
There's like, but someone did that. Someone said, yes, I will approve this. Let's go. And there had to be a motive behind that. What is the motive behind that? And why are we doing shit like that rather than, I don't know, normal shit like building real estate that'll help people in other places, but in exchange, we have some fucking soft power against someone like a China or something like that.
That's the politics of it. And that's where the problem sets in. We have to remember that in the United States, as shitty as it is, inside the United States, every congressperson and every senator who sits on a board or a committee feels the need to justify their seats so that they can run on something for re-election from their constituency. But their constituency is not a representation of the United States. It's a cross-reference of just their constituency,
yes, right?
So here's some bureau in New York or some borough in New York that thinks completely differently than this municipality in Alabama. But you have human beings who have to represent both of those, yes. And now they come together and they sit on a committee and they have to decide what they're going to do. When we were prosecuting the war on terror, there was a lot of focus on economically incentivizing and giving alternatives to the kids and the teens and the young adults who could become jihadis. Right? How do we give them something else to plant other than opium? How do we give them some other way to make money so they don't have to join, ISIS? How do we give them some other opportunity so they don't turn jihadi? Because if we can upset that, what they call the radicalization ladder, if we can upset the radicalization ladder, we can essentially cut off the flow of new recruits for the future. And it was working for a while. And that's why you started seeing digital recruiting efforts and why you started seeing lone wolf ISIS operators in the United States, because we were effectively cutting off the pipeline of future recruits. Well, then as we started winding down war efforts, early 2000s or early 2020s, as we started winding down those recruits, we had this huge infrastructure of USAID that because it's the government, if you don't use it, it gets taken away. So now all these AID programs are trying to struggle to find a justification for why they should continue to be funded. And you have all these mid-level and senior level officers who have grown in an era of global war on terror who now need to justify themselves for the next 15, 20 years so they can retire. And you have this base of senators and congressmen who are trying to create excuses so that they can go back to their constituency and say, see, we're doing a good job. And that's how you end up having these ridiculous...
You're looking at it as government incompetence.
Absolutely. It's government incompetence. And it's not incompetence at USAID. It's incompetence for the people who have to dictate the policy that USAID has to execute.
What do you think of the vitriol and anger at what's happened leading to the pendulum shift in the other direction of people now supporting and saying, get rid of the whole fucking thing?
It's sad. It's not the best way forward, but I understand where it's coming from because right. Just like we're seeing with Doge, just like we're seeing with so much of the American government right now, the idea of saving $1 trillion is really motivating. The idea of slowly improving the effectiveness of a government agency is not so motivating, right? So instead, we're culturally at a place right now where we're like, let's just break the toy and build a better toy in its place with no guarantee that the new toy is actually going to be better.
I mean, cynically, I don't have a lot of hope for these types of things because this is where I do agree with you, and I think people don't look at this point enough in that the government's just massive and there's regular, Jim and Joes around the water cooler who should be doing something else and they're not, and then something doesn't get done and there's a slippery slope to that, and then, this happens and that happens and boom, you have a fucking budget problem. Like, I get that 100%. But another thing you always say, and we've talked about this before, but I love like litigating this with you to see where your head's at, is you always talk about the element of conspiracy, you said it earlier, being written in when it can be explained by incompetence or stupidity. Now, here's where I level with you. I think people are far too easily jump into conspiratorial lenses on everything. I mean, you go on Twitter. I mean, it's fucking hilarious. Every goddamn thing is like, you know, oh my God, this whole cabal did this and now everyone's dead. And it's like the world is not tied like a bow like that. That's not how it works. There is incompetence. There are real things that are like less evil and more just like stupidity that lead to things happening. But my issue with you always taking that stance is that it allows like the 99% versus the 1% like uncommon rule. What I mean by that is you, Andy, could say like, hey, 99% of the things we hear these days that are conspiracies really are just incompetence or stupidity or not true, right? I might even agree with you because the numbers are so high on things we hear. But what it allows is that every time something really might be in that 1%, you can then say, no, this is one of the 99 right now.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? Like, do you see the issue with taking that stance?
I see the issue. I see the issue, and I see exactly what you're saying when it comes to being able to write off the one because of the other. What I'm really trying to say is this: the 1% of possible conspiracies should be taken seriously. But right now, when we have so much wasted effort on things that are explainable through incompetence, we lose the resources, we lose the attention, we lose the effort, we lose the credibility of the 1%. Because how do you even differentiate something that is worth our effort for the 1%?
I agree.
Right? Versus everything else. There's all sorts of instances. Here's what I know about government, right? There's two important things that I know about government that I think are so important to understand here. First, people who make a career out of government, the vast majority of those people have nothing better to do. Mm-hmm. That's why they make a career out of government, right? It's not because they're dedicated. It's not because they believe in the American dream. It's not because they believe in America. It's because they woke up one day and realized I have a really good gig. If I just do this thing without causing any waves for 30 years, I'll have a really good gig, a really good retirement. So I just need to sit here and do the thing. Let the president change, let the Senate change, let priorities change. It's not my problem. That's the Senate and the Congress. That's their problem. My job is just to check boxes, do the thing. They don't become experts at the thing. They don't go for continuing education with the thing. That their job is just do the basic thing for 30 years, get your retirement and move on. That's the first important thing, right? The second important thing is the government really wants to keep what it does wrong a secret. It wants to keep it a secret from foreign governments, and it also wants to keep it a secret from the American people, because government doesn't want people to worry about the stability and the functionality and the competence of government.
Which then leads to them worrying about it when they don't tell them.
Correct. So what you end up having is this situation where government incompetence is not only predictable, but it's acceptable, because we don't really know just how incompetent the government is, because they're very good at covering their own tracks, changing their own documentation, burying this, hiding that, classifying this, classifying that. So we don't even know the depths to which the incompetence exists. And that's what leads us to then conspiratorially believe that they're very competent.
Yes.
So competent that they're tricking us. They're fucking not that competent. They're barely competent enough to run the government, which Doge is finding they're not even doing that well. Right? So at what point will we believe, well, shit, maybe that guy with the big hair who's been calling the government incompetent for 3 years, maybe he's onto something.